Wyoming Territory, 1881. Wind lashed the high plains as dusk settled over a stretch of cottonwoods near the North Platte River, and Beatrice Vaughn was running. Her boots slammed against the dirt, skirts tangled around her legs, lungs burning as she shouted the name again. Peter. The silence that answered ripped a hole in her chest. She had only looked away for a moment, maybe two. 1 second her son was chasing a butterfly near the riverbank, the next he was gone. The wild, open land had swallowed him whole. Beatrice dropped to her knees in the tall grass. "Please," she whispered, voice raw, "please be here." Behind her the wind shifted, carrying the distant thud of hooves. She stood fast, heart hammering. A lone rider emerged from the tree line, tall in the saddle, wide-brimmed, hat low over his brow, rifle strapped to his back. His horse slowed as he caught sight of her. "Ma'am," he called, voice steady but cautious. "You all right?" Beatrice squared her shoulders. Dust streaked her cheeks and her hands trembled, but she met his eyes. "My son, he's gone, 6 years old. His name is Peter." He was just here. The cowboy swung down from his horse in a single motion. "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe less. Her voice cracked again. "He's never wandered off like this." He nodded once and scanned the horizon with sharp eyes. "Name's Holden Hart." "I'll help you find him." She blinked fast, trying to hold together. "Why would you?" Holden looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Because I know what it feels like to lose someone." He crouched low, eyes sweeping the ground, small tracks fresh. He went toward the trees. He turned back to her. "You stay close." They moved fast. Holden led the way, boots quiet against the underbrush. Beatrice followed, trying to keep her panic from turning into full-blown terror. Twilight deepened, brushing everything in silver. Then they heard a faint cry. "Hold up," Holden said. He raised a hand. "Listen." They both stood still. Then again a child's voice, thin and scared. "Peter," Beatrice shouted. A sob answered. "Mama," she broke into a run, branches snapping against her arms. And then she saw him, Peter, wedged between 2 boulders at the base of a shallow ravine, his face streaked with tears and dirt. She stumbled down, heart in pieces, hands reaching. "Oh, baby." "Careful," Holden warned, just behind her. "That rock's loose." Beatrice knelt and pulled Peter into her arms, cradling him to her chest. He clung to her, sobbing into her shoulder. "I thought you were gone," she whispered into his hair. "I thought I lost you." Holden crouched beside them, his voice gentle. "He's all right now. Just a little scraped up." Peter looked at him with wide eyes. "You found me." Holden gave a small nod. "Your mama did most of the work. I just helped a bit." Beatrice looked up at Holden. For the first time, she really saw him, the tired eyes, the quiet steadiness. He looked like a man who had carried more than his share of pain. "Thank you," she whispered. Holden tipped his hat, jaw tight. "Let us get you two back." Her small homestead sat a mile up the hill, a 1-room cabin with a lean-to barn and a chicken coop that needed patching. The place was rough but clean, and it stood because she had refused to let it fall. She settled Peter on the cot with a cup of warm milk and a threadbare quilt. His eyes drooped, exhaustion pulling him under. Holden stood awkwardly near the doorway, hat in hand. "I can go now that he's safe." "You could stay for supper," she said. "If you are not in a hurry." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right." They ate quietly, beans and cornbread with a little molasses. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt earned. "Your husband not around?" Holden asked as he wiped his plate with a crust of bread. Beatrice's eyes flicked to the hearth where a cracked photograph sat. "Died 3 years ago. Fever took him fast." "I'm sorry." She shrugged, but her voice was quiet. It was hardest on Peter. Must be hard doing all this alone. Beatrice looked at him then. "I manage." Holden gave a small nod. "I can see that." She offered him a real smile, her first in days. "And you? Anyone waiting on you somewhere?" He glanced toward the window where the last bit of light was fading. "No, left Texas a few years back. Been helping drive cattle north, doing odd jobs. Never settled long." "Why not?" he shrugged. "No real reason to." Their eyes met across the table. Something quiet and real passed between them. She stood and began clearing dishes. "You saved my boy." "I just did what was right." "That still counts." He helped gather the plates without being asked. Their hands brushed once and her cheeks flushed. She looked away, not from embarrassment, but from the strange, hopeful warmth blooming in her chest. Later, after Peter had fallen asleep, Beatrice walked him out to his horse. "You could stay in the barn tonight," she said. "It is safer than traveling after dark." Holden hesitated. "All right." "If you are sure." "I am." The lantern on the porch cast a soft glow over her face. She looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "You are not like most men who pass through," she said. He smiled faintly. "You are not like most women." They stood there, the air between them thick with things unspoken. Then Beatrice stepped back. "Good night, Holden." "Good night, Beatrice." She watched him walk toward the barn, his silhouette steady against the dark. And when she finally closed the door, she leaned her back against it, hand pressed to her chest, heart beating fast. She had held her missing child in her arms again. And the man who helped bring him back had left something behind, something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, frost clung to the porch railings like lacework, glinting in the pale light. Beatrice rubbed her hands together as she stepped outside, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. A low whistle drifted from the direction of the barn. Holden brushing down his horse with the same quiet purpose he'd carried the night before. He glanced up. "Morning." "You're up early," she said, stepping down onto the packed dirt. "Old habits," he replied, pausing to wipe his hands on a piece of sacking. "Didn't sleep much." She nodded, watching the way he moved, efficient but never hurried. "Peter's still resting. He had a bad dream, but he went back under." Holden looked toward the cabin. "He'll be all right. He's got someone who sees him." Beatrice's eyes dropped to the hem of her skirt where it brushed the frostbitten grass. "Most days I can't tell if I'm doing right by him or just getting through it." "You do more than most," he said. She didn't answer, but the corner of her mouth turned just slightly. Then she gestured toward the barn. "I've got feed sacks needing mending. If you're sticking around, there's a fence post or two that won't stand through another storm." "I don't mind work," he said. They moved together through the morning without speaking much. He hauled fence rails and drove them deep with a worn sledge. She stitched burlap beside the coop, pausing now and then to shake out her fingers. The barn cat trailed her, tail high, and the chickens picked through the frostbitten grass, clucking softly. By midday, Peter had come out to sit on the stoop, wrapped in his quilt, watching Holden with wary interest. "Can I help?" he asked. Holden looked up from where he was trimming a split rail. "You ever used a draw knife?" Peter's eyes widened. "No, sir." "Well, you're not ready for that, but you could hand me nails." Beatrice stood from the coop and crossed her arms. "Don't let him stand too close." Holden only nodded. "He'll stay a safe reach, won't you, son?" The boy nodded, and Beatrice watched them from a distance. Peter crouched beside the box of nails, offering them one by one with solemn focus. Holden took each carefully, never rushing, never raising his voice. The way he spoke to the boy with steady patience made something shift in her chest. Later, as the sun leaned westward, she brought out a pail of water and a tin of biscuits. They sat in the shade of the barn, the three of them, the boy between them. "You always work alone?" she asked, breaking a biscuit in half. "Mostly," Holden said. "Though this season I'm headed to a ranch near Laramie. They need spring hands." "You'll leave soon then?" "End of the week, maybe." Peter looked up. "Can I come?" Beatrice stilled, biscuit halfway to her mouth. Holden gave a slow smile. "Don't think your mama would go for that." Peter looked toward her. "Couldn't we go with him?" Beatrice brushed a crumb from her skirt. "That's not how things work, sweetheart." Holden sipped from the pale lid and didn't press the moment further. But Beatrice's thoughts didn't quiet after that. That evening, after Peter had gone inside, Holden lingered by the porch rail. The moon rose light and round over the ridge, casting long shadows across the pasture. "You ever think of leaving this place?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "Sometimes, but I built it with my own hands. Every board, every stone, it's not much, but it's mine." He nodded. "I get that." She looked at him then. "Do you?" Holden leaned one arm against the post. "I've never had anything that felt like it was mine, not for long." Beatrice wrapped her shawl tighter. "Maybe that's not about the place. Maybe it's about the people you choose." His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable in the moonlight. "Maybe it is." They stood in silence for a long time, the air between them charged with something neither of them tried to name. Finally, she stepped back. "You'll want a real bed tonight. There's a cot in the corner. It was my father's. It's not soft, but it won't freeze you through." He inclined his head. Thank you." As he passed her to enter the cabin, their shoulders brushed. She didn't move away. Inside, Peter was already asleep, his quilt pulled to his chin. Holden lowered himself onto the cot without a word. Beatrice banked the fire, the orange glow casting a soft light over the room. She turned toward him. "You'll be here through the week, if you'll have me." "I will." She crossed the room and extinguished the lantern. In the dark, she listened to Peter's breathing and Holden's steady presence across the room. The wind outside had gone still. For the first time in years, so had her heart. By the third morning, the snowmelt had pooled in shallow ditches, and the prairie grass began to lift its head again. Holden was already outside splitting kindling when Beatrice stepped onto the porch, her hair braided back, apron tied at her waist. She carried a metal basin and a bar of lye soap, nodding toward the clothesline strung between two aspens. "If you're done with that shirt, I'll scrub it clean before it sets stiff." He tugged it off and handed it over without a word, the chill biting his skin. She didn't look away, only turned toward the pump and began working the handle with a steady rhythm. "I've never seen a woman prime her own pump and patch a chicken coop in the same hour," he said, drawing his coat closed. "I never cared much for what others thought I ought to do," she answered. "It's less lonely that way." He watched her wring the shirt out, arms strong from years of doing things no one offered to help with. "You ever miss having someone beside you?" She glanced up. That a question or a confession? Holden leaned against the porch post. "A bit of both." She didn't answer right away. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. "I miss being seen, not just looked at. There's a difference." He nodded, eyes softening. "There is." Beatrice hung the shirt and moved on to a pair of Peter's trousers. "You always speak that plain, only when it matters." The screen door creaked behind them. Peter stepped out, dragging a wooden toy horse by its frayed string, eyes still puffy with sleep. He hesitated before walking to Holden. "I dreamed you were building a house." It had a porch and 2 windows. Holden crouched down. "Wasn't a barn." Peter shook his head. "No, there was smoke from the chimney." Beatrice paused with a clothespin in hand, her face unreadable. Holden looked up at her before answering. "Sounds like a place you'd want to stay." Peter nodded. "Can you teach me how to build one?" Holden placed a hand on his shoulder. "Start with learning how to measure a board. We'll go from there." Later, Holden showed him how to use a square and marking gauge, guiding the boy's hand with his own. Beatrice watched from the side yard, folding dry linens with the practiced grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. But her eyes weren't on the laundry. They were on the 2 of them, her son, and the man who'd taken to him like he'd been born to it. That evening, Beatrice pulled an old cedar box from beneath her cot. Inside were letters, thick with dried ink, and a folded piece of muslin holding a silver locket. She held it for a long time before crossing the room to where Holden was darning a tear in the saddlebag he'd brought. "This belonged to my mother," she said, offering the locket. "She passed when I was 12. Holden turned it in his hand. "It's fine work. She wore it every Sunday without fail. My father never replaced her, just kind of disappeared inside himself." He handed it back carefully. "That's a hard kind of quiet to grow up with." Beatrice slid it back into the muslin. "It taught me to listen close. People speak plenty without saying a word." Holden's eyes didn't leave hers. "What am I saying now? That you're waiting for someone to tell you it's all right to stay a while?" He didn't answer, but his breathing changed, as if something long-held had loosened in his chest. Peter called from his cot, half asleep. "Mama," she crossed the room and tucked the quilt under his chin. "I'm right here." Holden stood and picked up his coat. "I'll check the barn door. Wind's picking up again." She turned as he reached for the latch. "If you're still here come Sunday, I make stew. It's not church food, but it'll fill you." Holden looked over his shoulder. "I've had worse reasons to stay." She didn't smile, but her voice held something warmer than approval. "Good." The door closed behind him, and she stood in the quiet of the cabin, the scent of hearth ash and soap clinging to her sleeves. She pressed her hand briefly to the place where the locket rested in its box. Hope, she realized, wasn't a grand thing. It was built in the slow rhythm of days, in the way a man taught a boy to measure a board, or how he waited to see if a woman would ask him to stay, and she had, without saying the words. By Thursday, the thaw had reached the far edge of the pasture, where the grass grew low and brittle between scattered sage. Beatrice stood near the fence, holding a coil of wire under one arm while Holden braced the new post they'd sunk at dawn. The soil still held the memory of frost, but the earth gave now, not stubborn like before. "Careful with that end," he said, glancing toward the loop in her arms. "That barb'll tear your skirt if it slips." "I'm not worried about the skirt," she replied, steadying her grip. "It's the hands I need more." Holden set the post, tamped the soil firm, and leaned back on his heels. "You ever think about running cattle out here?" Beatrice looped the wire through and tied it off. "I don't have the stock or the neighbors to help drive them when the season turns. There's a man named Tully east of here, runs a small outfit. He's honest, might let you in on a few calves if you're willing to trade work come branding." She looked at him sideways. "You know every rancher between here and Montana, just the ones that don't cheat their hands." She dusted her palms and leaned against the fence. "You catalog people like I measure weather." Quietly and without letting on. Hard not to, when you've been the one sleeping in the hayloft and not the bunkhouse. You learn who'll feed you and who'll run you off with a shotgun. Peter's voice rang out from the ridge where he'd gone to gather kindling. "Mama." "There's something in the brush." Beatrice turned, already moving. Holden matched her stride, rifle unshouldered before they reached the boy. Peter pointed with both hands to the scrub oak where a shape stirred small, trembling, its back leg curled under. A fawn. No older than 2 weeks, ribs faint under the fur, its mother nowhere in sight. "Likely got separated during the snow," Holden said, crouching low. "Too young to make it on its own." Peter crept closer. "Can we help it?" Beatrice hesitated. "If we take it in, we'll have to feed it by hand." "And it might not live." Holden looked at her gently. "But it might." She knelt beside the fawn, ran her palm down its neck. "Wrap it in my shawl, Peter, we'll try." Back at the cabin, they cleared a corner near the hearth, fashioned a bed from burlap and hay. Beatrice warmed milk in a tin cup and used a muslin rag to drip it slowly into the fawn's mouth. Peter sat cross-legged nearby, watching without blinking. Holden stoked the fire, then turned to her. "You've got steady hands." "I had to learn." He watched her another moment. "I've seen folks give up quicker than this, over less." She didn't look away from the fawn. "I've buried a child before, my first a daughter. She was born too early. There wasn't anything to be done." Holden's voice dropped. "I didn't know. I don't speak of her much, not because I've forgotten, but because some griefs lie quieter when they're not prodded." He stepped nearer, uncertain, then reached for the kettle and poured what remained into the basin for washing. "You don't have to say more." She met his eyes. "I know. But I wanted to." They worked in easy silence after that, the kind that settles only when two people have seen enough of each other's truth to stop pretending. Peter dozed in the rocker with the fawn curled by his feet, the fire painting gold on the wall. Later, as Beatrice swept the hearth, Holden leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I'll be leaving for Laramie in 3 days." She paused. "I know. I've ridden out of 100 places, never looked back once." She turned, bristle catching on the bricks. "And now," he stepped forward. "Now I think about things, about what it might mean to stay." Beatrice let the broom rest against the wall. "This place doesn't offer much, not in the way most men want." "I'm not most men," she nodded slowly. "No, you're not." Holden looked toward Peter, then back at her. "I won't ask for promises, but if I come back when the thaw's full, would I still be welcome?" Her voice held no hesitation. "You'd be expected." He reached for her hand, rough palm closing around hers. No rush, no need for more than that. Just the quiet understanding of two lives that had found a rhythm side by side. Outside, the wind had shifted again, but it carried no threat. Only the scent of thawing earth and the promise of something waiting just beyond the next ridge. Inside, the fire burned steady. And neither one of them let go. The last morning of Holden's stay rose quiet, sky pale with spring mist, the horizon softened by distance. Beatrice stood near the hearth, tying a strip of calico around the fawn's neck to keep the milk cloth from slipping as Peter fed it. She hadn't spoken much since dawn, her silence not cold but threaded with something watchful. Holden filled the water bucket from the pump and set it by the door. "I'll ride after breakfast. That ranch won't wait on me." Peter looked up, a crease between his brows. "Will you come back?" Holden crouched beside him. "That depends. You reckon your mama still needs help mending fence come May?" Peter glanced at her, uncertain. She met Holden's eyes. "I reckon we'll have plenty of work," she said. Holden nodded once. "Then I'll come." They ate in the stillness of shared understanding. Bacon crisped over the fire, bread warmed on the griddle. Beatrice didn't ask him to linger. She didn't need to. When his saddlebag was packed and his rifle looped across the pommel, she walked with him past the gate, where the trail broke westward. The wind had a softer edge than before, carrying the scent of thawed roots and wet pine. Holden rested a hand on the saddle horn. "I've stayed longer than I meant to." "You're not the first man to say that," she replied, "but I mean to return." She nodded, eyes steady. "Then I'll see you when the grass is green." He studied her face. "You built all of this with no one beside you." "I don't aim to take that from you." "I wouldn't let you," she said, "but I wouldn't mind sharing it." Holden stepped closer, the wind pressing his coat back just enough that she could see the beating pulse in his throat. "You changed something in me, Beatrice. You reminded me I could still be seen." He touched her cheek, thumb brushing the curve just beneath her eye. "If I stay, I won't just be passing through." "I'm not asking you to pass," she said. "I'm asking you to belong." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I want that." They stood like that until Peter's voice called faintly from the porch, asking about the fawn's bottle. Holden pulled back, just enough to see her full. "I'll be back before the creek runs full." She nodded, and he mounted up. No more words passed between them as he rode out, but she stayed at the trail's edge until he was gone from sight. 4 weeks later, the pasture bloomed in soft patches, and the creek swelled with meltwater. Peter stood barefoot in the shallows, trousers rolled to his knees while the fawn dozed nearby beneath a hawthorn. Beatrice was mending a harness strap beneath the cottonwood when she heard hooves. She didn't stand. She didn't need to. She only looked up and smiled. Holden dismounted and tied his horse loosely to the fence. He crossed to her slow, as if the moment might vanish if he moved too fast. "I brought tools," he said. "And seed." She reached for his hand. "I've got space in the barn." "I was hoping you had space in the house." Her grip tightened. "I do." That night, she cleared the cot and made up the bed for two. Peter curled in his own corner, the fawn tucked near his feet. The cabin held a different shape now, wider somehow, with room for breath between the walls. Holden lay beside her under the patchwork quilt, his hand resting over hers. "I've never stayed anywhere past one season. You will hear." He turned his face toward hers. "Will you marry me, Beatrice?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The fire burned low, and the prairie wind settled into stillness. By midsummer, the pasture held calves and chickens, the coop repaired, the barn expanded by 2 stalls. Beatrice wore a simple dress of blue cotton and Holden a clean shirt with the sleeves rolled high. They stood beneath the cottonwood where they first spoke, a preacher from the Platte Valley Circuit reading low from his book. Peter held the ring in both hands, solemn and proud. Holden made a cradle for the fawn behind the chicken yard, where it could rest with shade and shelter. Beatrice planted carrots in rows beside the porch, and Peter learned to read from a Bible with worn corners. One night, as the stars turned over the ridge and the wind stirred the grass just once, Holden stepped out onto the porch and found Beatrice sitting alone, her eyes on the sky. He sat beside her. "You still listening?" She leaned into his side. "Always." He wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "What do you hear?" She looked up at him, eyes quiet and sure. "Peace." And that was the truth of it, not just survival, but peace. Earned and shared beneath a sky they both had walked through alone. Now they walked it together. Forever.